You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 209. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. What do you think is the most important skill for a law student and lawyer to develop in order to thrive in a law firm environment? Now, chances are you've read the title to this podcast episode, so you know that today we are talking about developing an internal market for your work. So yes, there is a big spoiler alert there. But I also wanted to provide some context in terms of why it is that we are talking about this skill, this topic in today's episode. Now, this episode is going live in May of 2025. And if you've been following the podcast series, then you'll know that I've been creating a number of podcast episodes that are geared toward law students who are spending their very first summer at a law firm. So if this is you in May 2025, then this is an episode I'm producing in real time because I want to support you. I want to see you succeed. And these podcast episodes are lasting resources. So you may be a summer student starting out in 2026 or 2027, which I think is so cool. If that is you, welcome. It's pretty cool to be speaking to you at some point in the future. The idea here is for me to be helping you out. Now, you may not be a student. You might be a lawyer at a relatively junior level of call, or maybe you're more senior, and you're here because you want to develop that skill. Developing an internal market for your work is something that I work with lawyers at all levels on. So you're absolutely in the right place. And what we talk about today is relevant to you as well. Now, before I dive into the substance of what I'd like to share with you, I would like to invite you to a free webinar that I'm hosting on Friday, May 23rd at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And it's all about how to become a trusted go-to at your law firm. This is, again, designed in particular with the summer student in mind. But what we talk about is also relevant to articling students, junior lawyers, senior lawyers, anybody who's looking to brush up on their practice skills. So in that webinar, I am going to be speaking with you about developing an internal market for your work. I'm going to be speaking with you about building your relationships. We're going to talk about how to grow and learn from feedback. We're going to be talking about developing a growth mindset so that you feel like you've got the courage that you need in order to do the things, right? We all know what to do. The idea here that I'm trying to impart on you in this webinar is how to go from knowing what to do to actually doing it. We're also going to be talking about confident communication. So how can you write and speak with greater confidence so that you inspire trust, you become that go-to. So we will link to the registration information in the show notes with this episode. So if you haven't registered, please do. I'd love to see you there. Whether you're a student, a lawyer, or if you're a lawyer or another professional who's involved in the development of other lawyers, you're welcome to join. I would love to have you there. If you can't make it live, no problem. Register anyways. I will send you a recording to the webinar. Now, getting back on track. What does it mean to develop an internal market for your work? If this expression is brand new to you, then what it means pretty simply is that as a junior lawyer, most of your clients are not external clients, especially if you're working in a large firm environment. Most of your clients are internal clients. That means typically other lawyers. It might be lawyers who are a few years ahead of you. It might be partners, junior partners, senior partners. It might be lawyers who are of counsel, but these are lawyers who are looking to you to help support them in their work. These lawyers may be your direct reports or the people that you report to directly, as in you're a litigation lawyer, there are partners in the litigation group, and they are your client. Or it might be that you're in litigation and your department gets work from other departments within your firm. particularly if you're in a large firm. So maybe there are solicitors that send you a certain type of court work. And so they would be your internal clients. Those corporate clients that you are serving are your internal client. And so it's important to find and create and cultivate relationships with your internal clients, especially at the beginning of your legal career, because those are the people who ultimately decide whether or not whether they can hire you or whether they can keep you, right? Is there a market for your work? So it is an essential ingredient. And when I work with lawyers who are transitioning out of a firm, whether it's after the articling period or when they're more senior as associates, typically what has happened is that the market for their work is no longer there. And sometimes this is a result of the economy, that the economy has just dried up in a certain area and the firm can no longer sustain a particular number of lawyers in a given practice area. Sometimes it's the result of the lawyer or student having not formed enough relationships to develop that market for their work. Sometimes, in unfortunate cases, there has been a breakdown of relationships and maybe there was a market for a lawyer's work, but then that market has since disappeared. And so this truly is the lifeblood of your practice. You want other lawyers giving you work. You want lawyers internally giving you work, referrals outside of your firm. And so what I'm talking about today is really to get you thinking about how to create an internal market for your work. You can also apply this, of course, to creating an external market for your work. So clients who are true clients, i.e. the end user of your legal services, other lawyers who might refer you, other professionals who might refer you. So a couple of challenges that come along on this topic. Number one, at law school, you are typically trained to be a lawyer. There are a lot of parallels between being trained as a lawyer and trained as a coach. And as a coach, for example, I was trained how to carry out a coaching conversation step by step. And the skill of coaching is one that I absolutely love, that I was trained for. And then, like lawyers, you enter into the market. And while you have the legal skills, so you've been trained to read cases, analyze cases, write about the law in a particular way, you've got the skills, the developing skills of a lawyer. My guess is that you weren't given a lot of training in terms of how to market yourself, in terms of how to be an entrepreneur of your mini business that you're running within your law firm. And it can feel quite unnatural for someone who, for example, is quite bookish, who is really good at studying and producing a beautiful quality product, but maybe who isn't quite as comfortable asking for work, promoting themselves, putting themselves out there. Then there might be a gap in their ability to attract the work in the first place so that they can demonstrate their skills. And I know a lot of lawyers struggle with this. I have created a previous podcast episode called Cringe-Free Marketing for Lawyers. So if you can relate, you can go back to that episode. There's some tips there as well. It's a real problem for a lot of lawyers. You've got the skills of a lawyer, but you don't necessarily know how to translate that into something that is a marketable service that you are providing with sufficient volume to then establish your role within your firm or organization. And I say there's a parallel between that and coaches, because for coaches too, part of my role as a coach isn't just the work that I do, it's also going and finding lawyers that I can help and support, finding law firms who I can support. And so there's this component of what I do as an entrepreneur, as an independent consultant and practitioner, of needing to go and create those relationships with the people that I most want to work with. Now, another parallel here is that lawyers and coaches are both in the helping profession. When I ask lawyers why they went to law school in the first place, and I ask a lot of lawyers this question because it often comes up in our coaching conversations. If you are at a career crossroads and you're scratching your head trying to figure out how you got there in the first place, sometimes it helps to ask yourself, why did you go to law school? And I often hear the answer, because I wanted to help people. So if you're like many of the lawyers that I work with and your goal is to help people, then you might struggle with the marketing component of helping people, right? You may see that there's, number one, that just might not be where your skill set is, right? You might be thinking about helping people as something that is distinct from this marketing thing. And you may also find that there's a bit of an internal conflict. You might believe at even unconscious level that there's something in conflict about wanting to help people and creating a market for your work, right? So if you think about medical professionals like doctors or dentists, for example, and you might look at procedures that they do that save lives, like a heart surgery or a lung transplant. And you might have a certain view on that type of work. And then maybe you compare that to plastic surgery. And maybe it's, I don't know, altering the look of somebody's face or what have you. There's all sorts of different surgeries and they're all coming to I can picture them all mentally right now. There's a wide variety. And we typically will hold judgments about which of those procedures we think are more valuable, more ethical, etc. And we might think that it's wrong to charge for something that is a basic life requirement. So if you are, for example, a doctor doing heart surgeries, you might really struggle with that. If you're a family lawyer and you're trying to keep a family, a parent maybe in contact with their child, you might view that as something that you are morally required to do. And you might feel conflict about charging money, especially if you know that your client can't pay very well. This may show up as well in a corporate environment, working in a law firm, maybe not. But I know from working with a number of lawyers that there's often this internal conflict between marketing and selling and developing your practice as a business person and the service that you provide as a lawyer. And this is recognized too. I mean, if you look at marketing rules, there are certain protections put in place in terms of what lawyers can and cannot say, what they can and cannot do. So there is recognition that lawyers are treated differently. They're held to a different standard relative to others who are marketing. And it's a reflection of the significance of the work that you do, the standard to which lawyers hold themselves. And so bear that in mind, right? As we talk about today's topic, you are operating in a fairly unique context. And so we want to recognize that. And just getting back to this idea of creating an internal market for your work, we want to see you healthy and thriving in your practice. And part of that is going to be developing relationships internally so that you've got the client base and the work to support your growth. The growth within the firm give you the opportunities to develop your skills, give you the opportunities to serve your clients, the internal ones, and perhaps indirectly at the beginning, your external clients. And then finally, the last note I wanted to mention here is that if you find yourself in a position where your internal market is, maybe it's not there. If you first start out at a firm, you don't have a market yet. And so you'll need to develop that market. And that can be quite different from jobs you've had previously. I know when I first started at a law firm, I never had a job like that. I had jobs in restaurants, at bakery. I was the airport improvement fee collector at the Vancouver airport, which is as awful as it sounds. I used to get to the airport at 4:45 in the morning so that I could charge people a tax for the improvement of the airport. And they would fight with me. They were grumpy. They didn't want to pay it. And I don't blame them. But I never had to go follow them or chase them or develop relationships with them inside the airport and ask them to pay. They came to me. We had our interaction and then they moved on. So if you're used to jobs where you show up at 8 and you leave at 3, or there's some contained amount of time where you're paid to be there, you're paid for your time physically present in a particular space. And now you're doing work where it's much different, where you're being paid on a project basis. Well, okay, you're probably on a salary, but the work that you do is on a project basis. You have more of an onus of developing relationships within your firm. You are seeking out work. You're developing those internal relationships. It's quite different from showing up at Starbucks, doing an 8-hour shift, and then going home at the end of the day. So that's why I think it's really important to focus on this and to cultivate some skills in this area. And like I said, this is where I see the greatest number of challenges for students and lawyers is not developing that internal market for their work. So in today's episode, what I'm going to do is offer 3 different frameworks to help you think about developing that internal market for your work. And I'm going to draw a parallel between being a lawyer and being a server in a restaurant. And I had this idea initially 6 years ago, it turns out. and I wrote a blog article about how to develop an internal market for your work using the analogy of being a server in a restaurant. And we'll provide a link to that article in the show notes. You're welcome to go back to it. I read it just last night, or I reviewed it last night, thinking, that would be a great topic for the podcast. And so some of what I talked about there, I will cover here, but it might be fun just to have that all in writing. So I'm going to dive in with those 3 suggestions, starting with the first one, which is to welcome your client as you find them, or welcome your customer if you're in a restaurant. And there's a few parts to this. Number 1 is this idea of welcoming somebody into your physical space. Now, back in 2019, when I wrote that blog article, we had not experienced the pandemic, and most lawyers were working in offices and they showed up every day physically in the office. So the idea of a hybrid working environment had not yet been birthed. It didn't exist in most cases. Some firms were virtual, but you were the exception if you did that, not the norm. Today, based on my understanding and experience working with law firms, there's a big mix. And most firms that I work with have some degree of flexibility. And this hybrid work culture means that people are not always in the office. Now, if you are a junior lawyer or an articling student or a summer student, or if you're a lawyer who's more seasoned and you're trying to develop your internal market, then I highly recommend you be physically present in the office space that you work in. Now, chances are you've heard from your managing partner or the management team at your firm, and they have encouraged this. This is pretty much what I hear in my conversations with practicing lawyers, with management who are on the ground. Most firms, most management want the lawyers physically present in the office. It doesn't always work out that way. But for you, what I would strongly encourage is that you have a physical presence in the office. It's going to help you increase your ability to welcome your potential customers. Now, you can imagine, drawing it back to that restaurant analogy, that you have a beautiful, thriving restaurant. There's music playing. It has a nice atmosphere. You can smell the food cooking. There's lots of people there. They all look really happy. It's very inviting relative to maybe a restaurant where the doors are closed half the time. You never know if they're going to be open. You finally do catch the door open and you walk in and there are those tumbleweeds kind of blowing through the hallway or whatever. I mean, it's desolate. It's deserted. It's a very different vibe. So you want to think of yourself as the former. You've got set business hours. You're open. You're ready for business. You've got all the ingredients. You've got the staff ready. You are welcoming that person. They feel it the minute they walk into your restaurant. They feel it the minute they walk into your office. So we want a physical presence. And what we want as well is for you to have that warm and welcoming attitude. So chances are you've had the experience of walking into a restaurant or an office or some place where you were greeted with a bit of a cold shoulder or a lack of enthusiasm, and it sends a chill, right? You don't feel comfortable. You don't necessarily want to go back there. And the same is true when you're working in a law firm environment. You want the customer, the client, the partner, the associate, whoever it is that has just walked in your door who needs help, you want them to feel welcome. Now, I had Amanda Haverstick on the podcast recently, and she talked about typos and the degree of care that you give a written product. And she said, and I thought this was so interesting, she said, if there is a mistake in the memo, the partner reading the memo may be upset about the mistake, but really what they're more upset about is the attitude, right? That they will make the assumption that maybe you didn't care. And that is what we're getting at when it comes to welcoming your client. You want them to feel welcome. You want them to feel appreciated. And so when they come to you, extend that open grace. Show them that you're curious, you're engaged, you're interested. You want to work with them. Now, the last thing I'll say here when it comes to welcoming your client, welcoming your customer, is to take them as you find them. So your customer, your client, the partner that you're going to be helping out, they may have sat down before coming to see you and thought about the problem, and maybe they've written a beautiful memo that they're going to hand off to you, and it's got everything that you need, hyperlinks to every document that you might need, really properly distilled questions for you to answer, a list of resources that you can start out with, precedents that you can follow. That's possible. Or it could be that lawyer just stepped out of a meeting where there was a huge debate with a client and opposing counsel, and they were told that the law was one way. They'd always believed the law to be another way. And now they are looking for somebody to help them figure out what the law actually says. And if you're in the latter case, you're not getting the beautiful memo. They may not even know how they want to articulate the question. And so your job isn't to judge the client and to say they should have done it differently. Your job is to welcome them no matter what, and to be as helpful as you possibly can to guide them, to give them the support that they need to help them get to the next step that they are looking to get to. So that is point one, is we want you to welcome your client as you find them. So we are, number one, having a physical presence within the office where people feel welcome, where they see that you are regularly open for business. We want a warm and positive attitude. So no matter what it is that they're asking you to do, within reason. If this is an abuse of some relationship, obviously I'm not talking about that. But if this is a request that falls within the scope of your work, then you want to be gracious, you want to be welcoming, you want to be encouraging. And then we don't want to be judging our clients. We don't want to be saying, well, they should do it this way, or it would be so much better if they do it that way. We want to take them as they come to us and help and support them no matter what. So that moves us to the second area of focus for today's podcast episode, which is communication. Again, this is where I see a lot of lawyers struggle in all years of call. So this is not just a student thing. This is something that can happen with lawyers well into their years of practice. And communication is key, right? It is truly key. And so what I'd invite you to think about here is you're at a restaurant, you've got a server, they're going to come up, they're going to take your order, they're going to keep you updated on the status of your order. And at the same time, while you know that your server is present, that they're there if you need them, you're having a lovely dinner with a friend, you're having a conversation with that friend, maybe you haven't seen that friend in a while. You don't necessarily want that server coming over to you every 2 minutes, interrupting your conversation and asking you a question. So let me dive in a little bit further in terms of what you can expect or how you might consider the communication components of your work interaction with your lawyer that you're working with, your client. So at the very beginning, when you think about a lawyer, an internal client who's giving you a task, chances are they want you to do research or support with some due diligence or look into something or file something or find something out, whatever. They'll have a task for you. And what your job is at that point is to be like the server at a restaurant and basically take the order. So personally, I like it when I go to a restaurant and I can see the server write down my meal request, because then I'm not wondering if they are holding it in their head. Now, some are really good. They memorize everything and they don't make mistakes. Others, not so much, right? This is reminding me of the weekend where, oh my gosh, where was I? They got the order completely wrong. They just didn't follow the instructions. I think they made an exception. They allowed me to have this thing that was on the menu, but for a different day. But then the meal arrived and it was wrong. I think I asked for dressing on the side. The dressing was in it. It was missing half the ingredients. So anyhow, don't try to show how smart you are by memorizing everything if that's not how your brain works, right? Write it down. It gives comfort to the person who's asking for the work to be done to see you taking the notes. You then also have your contemporaneous notes. You can go back to those notes if you have questions. Maybe the lawyer who was instructing you already gave you the information. It just slipped by, whatever. So that's your opportunity. Write down what it is that person is asking you to do. This is a great time to ask clarifying questions. So if in the moment you have questions that come up, you can ask those questions. When you're done taking instructions, you might read back the order. So think about the barista at Starbucks who confirms to you, yep, that will be a double tall latte with 1 shot of vanilla, whatever it happens to be. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Thank you. If the instructions are more complicated and you need to go back to your office to process them, that's great. Or you need some time to digest them, that's great. Send your lawyer a note that confirms what it is that you think you're expected to do. Thanks so much for our meeting. That was really great. looking forward to working on this project with you. Here's what I understand the instructions to be, ... So that lawyer then has an opportunity to say, yep, that's exactly what I wanted. Or actually, that thing you said down here is, I think we had a miscommunication. Here's what I actually want. Or on second thought, maybe that's not what I want. I want something else. And you also want to set a timeline. Now, in a restaurant, there's kind of an implicit understanding that your food is just going to show up. But let's say there's a delay in the kitchen, or that the dish that's being ordered will take 45 minutes. It's one of those yummy souffles that needs to be baked, whatever. Then you're going to set a timeline. Now, in a law firm setting, I would recommend maybe the timeline is implicit. That does happen, especially with urgent assignments where it's like, listen, we need this by the end of the day, or this thing just came in. Can you get to this ASAP? I mean, I guess in that way, you are being given expectations in terms of the time. But for longer projects, you do want to have a timeline. And if your lawyer says, oh, it's not urgent, any time is fine, pin them down. And pinning them down can be something like, how about we aim to have this submitted in 2 weeks' time? I will drop that off with you. And the reason you want to do that is that now you are working toward a deadline. They are working toward a deadline. You don't have this open project, because what can happen with open projects is that because they're not urgent, you will, with the best of intentions, take on and complete work that is more urgent. And when that happens often enough, this thing that didn't have an initial timeline and no urgency becomes urgent, and then you can be in a bit of a panic. So we want to make sure that you've got a deadline. So that's at the beginning. You want to communicate clearly about what's being ordered, the expectations, when it's going to be delivered, etc. Now, once you've left that initial order-taking situation, we don't want you to disappear completely. There are a number of cases where you'll want to go back to your instructing lawyer for a further conversation. So if there's a problem, let's say you are at a restaurant, the client has ordered a steak, you go to the kitchen and realize that you're out of steak. Well, you're probably going to want to go back to the customer and say, listen, I'm so sorry, we are out of steak. I can't produce that, but here's some other options for you. What would you like to do? Same thing for your instructing lawyer. If you realize right off the bat that there's a big problem, you want to go back and say, hey, listen, here's the problem. Now, things that might come up, there might be delay. You might start out on your research and realize that you need to gain access to information that you don't have handy. You're going to have to write off to some institution to get that information to you, or write to the client or whoever. So there might be a delay. You might have clarifying questions. You might be tasked with a research project. And once you get into the research, you realize, wait a minute, there's a lot more here than I had anticipated, than my instructing lawyer may have anticipated. So you might want to go back and clarify instructions. You want to make sure that if your lawyer client reaches out to you, that you're responsive. If they send you an email them back. Maybe you can't provide a substantive email right away, but you might acknowledge, hey, thanks, got your email. I'm going to turn to that first thing in the morning, or I'll get back to you a bit later today. But don't ghost them. If you ignore somebody's email, then they're left in this awkward position of not really knowing what the status is. And there was an example of this that I witnessed when I was a lawyer, and it was a student who'd been asked to go file a court document by more senior lawyers within the firm. And the student went off and they actually did the job, but then they were MIA, unreachable. And so the senior lawyers were calling around, and that's how they contacted me, trying to find out, had this thing been done? So even though the student had executed and completed the task that was asked of the student, unfortunately, because of the lack of communication, the instructing lawyers felt very uneasy about the whole situation. And that eroded the trust that they were able to have in that student, because they didn't know the job had been done. So we want to make sure that where you have opportunities to give quick updates, that the instructing lawyers, the people that need to know, are given those updates so that they're not wondering. They're not wondering if you're doing the job. They're not wondering if the job has been done. They're not worried. And as I alluded to at the beginning, you want to strike a balance. You don't want to be going back every 5 minutes with an update or a question. I recommend that if you do have questions, you batch your questions. So get everything all in order. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the idea there is you don't want to be peppering people with questions all of the time. You want to make their job easier, not harder. So that brings us to the third point. So just to recap, we're going to welcome your client as you find them. Number 2, you're going to communicate clearly throughout, but we're also going to use our discretion in terms of how often we're checking back with our customer. And then finally, number 3 is to focus on a quality product. We want a 5-star meal, a Michelin quality 5-star meal that people rave about. They want more. So what does that mean? Well, if you think about a restaurant, when you've been delivered a quality meal. You can imagine you order the steak and you're presented with this perfectly done steak the way exactly how you asked. And it's got these nice, roasted potatoes, maybe some veggies on the side, and everything is paired perfectly and it looks gorgeous. And you compare that, for example, to, maybe someone shows up and they drop a plastic bag of groceries on the table and there's a raw steak. It's still in the styrofoam container with the plastic wrap on top. And there's some raw turnips that have been kind of chucked in there. They're still a little bit dirty because, they were the organic ones. And so they still have earth on them. And, then there's these potatoes, same thing or whatever. So there's a big difference. You would never dream of serving up a bag of uncooked groceries if you worked at a restaurant, nor do you want to deliver up an uncooked, unfinished work product if you're working at a law firm. And yet this does happen. So what does that mean? It means that when you deliver the final work product to your instructing lawyer, you want it to be beautiful. You want it to be polished. You want to make sure that you have cleared out any typos. This means if you're using spell check, make sure there aren't words that don't get caught by spell check. There are a number of them out there. And so make sure there's no typos. Make sure that the fonts are all matching. Make sure that if they have specific instructions about formatting, that you have done exactly what you need to do for formatting. This has come up with lawyers that I've worked with where they get very unhappy because there is a certain way that the contract needs to be set up. And if the student or the lawyer hasn't done it, then they need to do it themselves. And that is not well received. So make sure you've done all the simple things that you can do to make that document as perfect as you can make it. You also want to make sure that you've fully digested the work that needed to be done. So in the case of research, for example, you've read the cases, you've thought about the cases, you've decided how the cases all fit together, you've analyzed it, you've explained it in the way that makes the absolute most sense to you, you've edited it. If you are out looking for information and there's information that you could have obtained, that you have filled in that information, you don't want to be giving a work product that has a bunch of gaps in it, a bunch of holes, a bunch of notes to draft, where you leave the onus on the instructing lawyer to do that unless it's been agreed upon in advance, or the information that you're seeking is on its way, you just don't have it yet, or it's something that you yourself are not able to obtain. But again, this is something where I've heard senior lawyers say it was very difficult for them to work with particular lawyers because they didn't complete the job. They gave them an unfinished work product. They then had to do the work themselves. And sometimes that work product came in on a deadline that was agreed to with the lawyer or student who did the work. But that deadline didn't leave the instructing lawyer much time to actually obtain that information themselves. So again, we don't want to dump a bag of raw groceries. We want to make sure that the work product that you've created is complete. We also want to make it pretty. If you think about a 5-star meal, they're making it look nice. And so that will probably look different depending on whether you're delivering an electronic document, if you're still using paper, what does that physical document look like? If there's a file that goes along with it. And so you want everything to be packaged nicely. You're presenting a beautiful work product to your client. And if you need more guidance, for example, let's say there's a point of fork in the road, for example, or there's an issue that you need to decide on or different pathways forward, what I recommend that you do here is to do as much of the work beforehand as possible so that when you are going to the lawyer, you can say, here's what I've done. Here's the research I've already done. Here's what I see as being the options. What do you think? Here's what I think is the best course. What do you think? So instead of just saying, there's a problem and solve it, you show that you've already done some of the work. Now, the lawyer might listen to your analysis, review your work, listen to the options that you've offered, and maybe none of those options is something that they're going to go with ultimately, but they will appreciate the fact that you have packaged it up and made an effort. Again, it goes back to attitude, an effort to solve the problem before bringing it to them to solve. Now, a couple more things in terms of your restaurant. Again, we're thinking about this client, this customer, and to have a successful restaurant, you want that customer to keep coming back. And one of the sort of tenets of marketing that I think is kind of neat is that it's easier to continue on building a relationship with an existing client than it is to acquire new clients. So think about that from the perspective of your internal market. You want to develop long-term, lasting relationships with the lawyers in your firm that you most want to work with. And so going back to the restaurant analogy, how do you do that? Well, let's talk about mistakes. Let's say you get to the table, you deliver the steak and they asked for rare and it's well done. Or maybe you deliver a plate of, seafood pasta and the pasta has, oh my gosh, just think of all the things that you've discovered in your food. I have discovered crazy things, that a hairpin in one green curry dish I ordered. See, I even remember what it was. Gosh, there was a time that I ordered a salad and it had a ginormous bug inside of it. I'm sure you've had the experience of finding a hair or something unpleasant in a dish. We all can think of the times where we've been presented with something to consume and it has just had something absolutely repulsive in it. So if that happens, right, if you find that you make a mistake, now maybe it's something small, it's not a huge cockroach or anything like that, but there's an error, right? There's something that needs to be fixed. We want to immediately deal with the problem. We want to, number one, take responsibility, right? This is not the time where you want to say, well, the kitchen was really busy and so they obviously didn't see that giant cockroach before they plated your salad. It doesn't work, right? Nor do you want to say, well, I gave this memo to my assistant to proofread. Obviously, they missed out on all these mistakes because look how terrible this is. That is not the way that you want to deal with the mistake. You want to take responsibility. So you want to simply acknowledge, thank you for drawing that to my attention. You're absolutely right. Let me fix that problem. So you can imagine you've put the steak down in front of them. You want to pull that plate right off the table. You don't want them staring at the offensive whatever it is. You want to deal with the problem right away. So that's what you want to do. You want to own the mistake. You don't want to blame anybody. You might offer an explanation. Personally, I don't think most people want to hear an explanation. If they do have an explanation, it's extremely brief. I'm sorry, it was an oversight. It won't happen again. And then you fix the problem. And bonus points, you do not make the same mistake again. So people will be relatively forgiving the first time something happens. But if you make the same mistake over and over, that's when people start to get concerned. Is it a question of aptitude that someone is not able to correct a mistake that they've made more than once? Is it attitude, right? Is it that they simply don't care and so they're making that same mistake over again? So you want to be paying attention to that. And if you get feedback about making the same mistake over again, don't leave it. Don't let it fester. Do something about it. This is where getting coaching can actually be really helpful, and having a mentor help you can be really helpful. So reach out, get some support, because we really want to make sure that you are learning from mistakes. You don't want to be making the same mistake more than once. As your practice evolves, the level of complexity that you'll be dealing with will also increase. And so chances are there will be mistakes that you make over the course of your career. You are human, we all are, but we want those mistakes to be a reflection of the fact that things are getting harder, and maybe it's a judgment call, maybe it's a really tricky area of the law. It's not that somebody has already told you, here's the problem, here's how you fix it, and that we're simply not following that feedback. So we've talked about mistakes, other things that you might do in order to win over your customers, to bring them back. Offer dessert. What else can I do to help you? I noticed that the research pointed us in the direction of filing a claim against these parties. Would you like me to go ahead and draft an initial claim? The due diligence report shows X. Do you want me to follow up on that? Do you want me to draft a summary or a note to go to the client that explains in a high level what it is that we found during the due diligence process? So you want to identify what one or more next steps might be, and then offer to help your client with those next steps. So again, you might think about it as offering them dessert. What would be irresistible? What would keep that person at your restaurant longer, give you more of an opportunity to make them feel welcome and to develop that relationship? Now, you might also ask them to invite their friends, right? You might think about a project that you've just completed. You really loved it. It's exactly what you want to do. Hey, listen, next time one of these comes in, I would love to help you out on that. If you know other lawyers who are doing similar work, I'd love it if maybe you let me know who they are. I can go and reach out to them. Or if you happen to be talking to them, let them know that I'd love to help, that kind of thing, right? So you want that happy customer to be bringing their friends to making referrals back to you. And then finally, feedback. You might have feedback unsolicited, that markup on a document. It might be that they tell you straight up, this was good, this wasn't so good. It might speak for itself, right? If you work for somebody and then they come back the next day with, 5 times the amount of work that they just asked you to do, that's a pretty good indication that they were happy with what you delivered and they're back for more. And you might also want to, again, this goes back to this learning from your mistakes, is to act on the feedback. You might feel like you can ask for the feedback if you feel comfortable. Maybe you can ask for feedback. It helps sometimes if you're more specific. Hey, listen, when I was drafting this memo, I was trying to make it really clear. And so, I tried to make the sentences short. Okay, now this example is getting a bit weird, but think about what maybe you were trying to accomplish in the task that you were doing. Maybe it's a summary of due diligence. How did you find the format that I used? I tried to design the table in a way that was user-friendly. Do you have any suggestions on what worked for you, what I might do differently next time? So really what you're doing there is just figuring out what worked so that you can do more of it, figuring out what doesn't work so that you can avoid doing that again in the future. So that's what I have for you today. This really has been a crash course in not just being a lawyer, but being a really effective server. And next time you're at a restaurant, notice what they're doing. When you go to Starbucks, when you go to the restaurant, when you go anywhere where there's a service provider, notice what they do that makes you feel good, that makes you feel valued, that makes you think, this is a place that I want to come back to. This is a place I want to recommend to my friends. What are they doing? Because those are the very same things that you want to do in a law firm. So I've given you some ideas. Take your customer as you find them, communicate clearly with them, but in a way that doesn't overwhelm them. And finally, you want to deliver that 5-star experience. Deliver that beautiful, finished, polished product. Offer them dessert. Deal with any mistakes or criticism in a way that is professional, that solves the problem, where you take responsibility, where you're direct, you're honest. And when you do these things, then you are basically taking control over a number of factors that are within your control to develop and enhance the relationships that you have internally. And when you have those internal relationships, that's when your practice really starts to thrive. That's when you get the work assignments that are going to have you working with the lawyers that you most want to work with, where you're learning the skills that you want to learn, the end clients that you're most intrigued by. And so these are the skills that you want to develop. Sometimes these skills are not ones that you already have, especially if your prior work experience didn't require that you have these skills. So hopefully you've got some takeaways from today's podcast episode that you'll be applying in the near future. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're listening to this podcast episode when it goes live, there will be an opportunity to join me on Friday, May 23rd for a free webinar at 11 a.m. Pacific time. It will be very much in the flavor of what we've talked about today, and I'd love to see you there. So please do sign up. And, regardless of when you're listening to this episode, I really hope that you enjoyed it. I would love to support you at whatever stage you're at, whether it is helping you develop your internal market, whether it's helping you with your practice management, whether it's helping you gain clarity over the direction of your career. Those are the things that I want to help you with, and I'm here to support you. So with that, maybe I'm offering you dessert. I'm offering you dessert. So come back, have dessert, tell your friends about this podcast episode. It might help them too. And with that, I'm going to sign off and thank you for joining me this week. And I hope to see you again soon, maybe next week. And if again, you're at some point in the future, that's so cool. I hope you're having a fabulous summer, and I look forward to reconnecting again soon. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.